Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Amy.
And this is Margaret. And today we are talking about mom blame. Mom blame. Why do moms always get the blame?
Margaret, we're soaking in it. I mean, I'll speak for myself.
We
I'm
are.
familiar with this topic. I'm living
Let
it.
me tell you that in an unusual change of roles, I did the research for this episode.
Yes.
And let me tell you, I have become radicalized. You know how they talk about like people going down like weird internet wormholes and becoming like weirdly radicalized and like running off to
Yes.
foreign countries to join weird armies or like becoming whatever. This is what happened to me while researching this
Okay.
episode. The
Wow.
scales have fallen from my eyes. I have fallen from the horse on the road to Damascus, and I have been changed.
Okay. All right. Hit me. I'm so excited for this. For you to bring the research and the
I am
hot
too.
takes.
Bringing some research. I'm going to start with I don't even want to say mother of this field because I don't know if she was a mother, but Paula J. Kaplan did a
Okay.
study in, wait for it, 1985 with a guy named Hall McCorquodale. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but we'll link to it. You can read it. Mother blaming in major clinical journals. So this is like what do you call it? It's an article, but it's you know how it's like some articles are like, I wrote this for medium.com and some articles are like, I'm really smart and I wrote this for a journal and
Right.
it's full of citations.
And it's a study of studies, sounds like. Like they're studying the other studies in journals like the one this was published in.
Yes,
sort of
they're
thing.
doing like a deep dive research. I think it's called like a clinical
Okay.
article or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But you know what I mean? It's like a smarty pants article.
Yeah.
Here's what it says. The authors examined 125 psychiatric and psychological journals from 1970 to 1982 that dealt with the causes of mental health problems. In those articles, mothers were blamed for 72 different types of psychological conditions in their children, ranging from depression to marijuana use to hyperactivity to homosexuality, and even an inability to deal with color blindness.
Speaking as the mother of more than one colorblind child, did you know that about me? It's a little
Well, Amy,
tidbit about me.
I have some notes for you on that
Get
because it's
ready
your
to judge.
fault.
So it's my fault that the kids that one or more of my children might be colorblind, but also that they're not dealing with it well is also my fault. Is that what this is saying? I mean, probably, right? Like that it's the mother's fault, the inability to deal with color blindness in the person who possesses it.
Whatever is going on with
Also
their
the mother's fault.
rods and cones is not
Mhm.
your fault. That is genetic, but
Right, but the
their
study
inability to deal with color blindness is your fault.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking in this case, like minor color blindness that is like a fun, like cocktail party trick. You know, those things on the phone when you pull out, like,
Right, and
it's
you
all like
can't see
green
it.
dots and then there's an 8 and blue
It's like
dots.
the dress, right? It's like
more
the
than
dress
one
that changes
exactly.
colors.
I have more than one child who can't see the 8, you know, who can't read the numbers. And it's just, it's so endlessly fascinating when you can.
Well, I hope you stay up tonight and wonder what you've done,
I
Amy.
think they deal with it pretty well.
Well, maybe you did a great job.
But this is like, so this is the 70s and early 80s. So this is back in a time when like autism was the refrigerator mother's fault,
Correct.
right? Everything.
As was schizophrenia, to be clear. Schizophrenia was the product of the schizophrenic mother.
But the good news is in the almost 40 years since then, this is surely cleared up and this isn't a thing anymore, right?
Wrong. So zooming out, I think what's so interesting about this and what is the cause of my radicalization on this subject is that motherhood is simultaneously completely dismissed as a job, right? Like, oh, you don't work? You're just a mom? Stay at home mom? Totally invisible? Like people walk away from you at the cocktail party because like we could not care less that you are like a mom is not a job. Like what do you actually do to contribute to society?
Right.
While
Nothing you say
also
could be
being
interesting.
cited as this vast cause of human ills. Like how do we retain both of those ideas at the same time, Amy?
Right. How could what you do be completely ineffectual and also everything bad was your fault and your doing?
Right. Like what you do is not worth a salary. It's not even worth being discussed for 2 minutes at a cocktail party. It's so boring. But also, as we look around the universe, the cause of every ill, it's you. Hi, you're the problem. It's you.
And this yeah, like, I mean, this does live on for sure, right? Like, any way that you're
Oh,
not fully self-actualized.
I'm citing the parenthood of this study, but
Yeah,
not
yeah,
at
yeah.
all to say this is a problem of the '80s. It's
Right,
just
right.
that this was the sort of foundational study.
It was
Yes.
basically in the '80s. It was in the 1980s before somebody said, "Wait a minute, like, moms are getting blamed for all of this." I'm assuming this was sort of the first study that sort of collected, like, seems like moms are being blamed for all of these things, and maybe there's an overapplication here?
Correct. Well,
Okay,
except for let me take you back to 1958,
okay.
where sociologist Helen Merrill Lind in her book says, now she's 1958, so she's looking back to like 1920s. For the
Right.
last 25 years or more, child psychologists have been warning parents, especially mothers, of all the things they must not do or be, lest they permanently damage their children. Parents have been censured for being over strict and over permissive, over detached and overprotected, and for 1,000 other mistakes of commission and omission.
Commission and omission. This is it.
Right.
This is why we've been, have doing What Fresh Hell for 7 years, right? Because
Right.
you're wrong if you do and if you don't.
Right.
You're
Stop
wrong if you
helicoptering, you crazy lady.
yeah,
You're not kids. Your kids are gonna, grow up to be permanent babies.
yep.
But wait, you're not doing enough. Like how come you're not helping your kid thrive in these 8 different ways? And how come they're not eating like French, children?
Right, right. How come
You
you're not
monster.
every teachable moment? Yeah, yeah. And this is deeply familiar. So has anything changed since the '80s?
No.
Like,
I mean, I think that
the good news is
certainly there are areas where like we have come to understand that like the 1970s idea, as you were mentioning, of the schizophrenic mother, the refrigerator mother causing autism. Um,
or like the '70s, it makes me think of the like, "Bye, you guys. Like, you guys figure out what's for dinner. I'm going to my ceramics class, and I'm gonna care about myself for a change." At least in popular culture, I feel like that's held up as the sort of selfish mom finding herself, and that's the beginning of a whole other set of problems.
For sure. And it is absolutely worth stating that poor moms, single moms, and moms of color get the worst of this, right? This is like single moms are the cause of everything that's wrong in society. That's a trope that we hear again and again, which is ironic since like the moms are actually the ones they're doing it. They're single
Right.
moms. And the fact that like moms on welfare are bringing everything down. There's so many ideas around how moms are not just to blame for what is happening with their own children and like why their own children are turning out to be a mess, but our entire society's ills are often laid at the feet of like the poorest and the most disenfranchised moms among us.
Absolutely. I did a fresh take with Esau McCauley a couple months ago, and he wrote a book called How Far to the Promised Land, a memoir, and
Mhm.
he talked about it um, so clearly that, the welfare queens, which is a, offensive stereotype of the '80s when he was growing up, and how to be a poor Black child with a poor Black single parent mother, she was a welfare queen. So just her existence, her very motherhood was something that was already like a problem, right? That he was there was a problem and was a
Mhm.
blight on society. And what it's like to grow up with that sort of negative pall cast upon your like existing in the world. It was really I thought about it in a new way because I remember that. I'm old enough to remember, welfare queens being on the news, like that's the number one problem with society.
Right, and definitely mentioned in, like, a presidential address and stuff that this idea that, like, welfare single moms were sucking all these resources that they didn't deserve, but that dialogue has not disappeared at all. I mean, the idea of, like, single motherhood and people taking handouts and stuff, that is a cause of society's ills still with us.
Mhm.
But as you're talking about, like, what has changed, this blew my mind as the mom of a kid on the spectrum. That mother blame, this is from the AMA Journal of Ethics and an article by Mitzi M. Waltz, PhD. Autism was considered at one time the fault of refrigerator mothers, cold mothers who did not show children enough love, as we were discussing. That paradigm, once rejected, had a new one take its place. Intense demands that mothers be engaged in therapeutic parenting almost every waking moment. This is only a subtler iteration of the child saving mentality that places blame for autism. No longer the objected refrigerator mother, today's autism mom is supposed to be a child saving hero, expected and encouraged to do anything and everything in pursuit of normalcy, from special diets to special schools to medication to therapeutic toys. The
Mhm.
discourse, however, remains one of covert parental guilt. If your child becomes an autistic adult, it is your fault because you failed to do enough to save him or her.
Wow.
And that just, this is like, it's the paradigm has shifted, but into another kind of poisonous avenue,
Another
that
impossible
like,
right.
it's not your fault, but if you don't fix it, it is now
Mhm.
somehow that, and I do think that I'm always a little bit wary of these absolutes of like, now the problem is this definition. The problem is multi-layered. And I do think, in my own life that I see a problem, and I know you're this way, Amy. Like, I see a problem and I try to think of ways to fix it. Like, that is part of my nature. It is probably coded into my femaleness to a certain degree. Possibly, I don't know if it's genetically coded or if it's coded in my socialization.
Mhm.
But when I see a problem, I will do a lot to fix it. And
Mhm.
so having a kid on the spectrum, yes, like I do go into the mode of like, okay, what's on that? I'm researching, I'm reading books, I'm going to figure it out. And that I have found over time that I've had to back away from that to some degree just because um I don't have the time or the effort to do it all, but there is a humming thing in the back of my head, not just with my kid on the spectrum, with all of my kids, that how they turn out is a constant function of my own behavior. And that what is radical about thinking about mom blame, because I was like, oh, I'll do some research and then we'll have a conversation that it's like, Amy, we've got to stop giving ourselves such a hard time. Like, we have to break society as we know it. I'm
Right.
sorry to tell you this, but like, we actually have to look at this through a lens of what if it's not my responsibility, but like, what if we completely change how we think about the role of mothers?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
huge, Amy. It's huge.
To pin it all back on, stop being so hard on yourself. Like,
That's it.
moms are
Like, go
so
get
hard on themselves,
self-care.
like right.
Go get
You're
self-care.
you're making this all up in your head that these expectations are unrealistic and placed upon you. Like, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And when you have a kid who's struggling, you have a kid who has a health condition that's confusing and chronic and not great, it is yes, you're right. It is just presumed often by us that the person who's got to make the appointments and do the research and chase the answers is the female parent.
Yes,
Um,
until the day that your kid gets into a school that you're really proud of after all your hard work and you post about it on Facebook and people are like, "Look at her taking response. Oh, she
right,
can't let go." Like,
right,
that's not your accomplishment, mom. That's your
right.
kid's. Back off, you know?
Back off. Exactly. You're wrong if you're leaning in too hard, and you're wrong if you're leaning back too much. And yeah, it's extremely complicated. It makes me think of another way that I think this is more complicated in the current parenting state we're in. Can I tell you what that is after this?
Please.
You were saying before the break that if you are, as an example, if you're a parent of a kid on the spectrum, that you have to just immediately become full time super parent of a kid on the spectrum to make sure you're doing all the interventions and everything that they need to grow up as self fulfilled as they can be, whatever that is, right? For your child and what they need. Um, because you will always have it reflected back on you that you might have or could have or should have done more.
Done something else.
Now I
Yeah.
think, right? There's something else coming out over the top. I actually just saw it this morning on Instagram. Somebody posting that my job, she said, as a mother of an autistic child, is not to change my child, it's to change the world. And I thought,
Big job.
is that your job? Right. Right, I understand the sentiment, but,
I'm
like,
tired just thinking
mm,
of that job.
now
Yeah.
now now you I have to go out every day and make the whole world accommodate that my kid might not act in a public place like you think a kid should act, and,
What's mind
who cares if you
blowing
think
is
that?
that there's a part of me that's like, I'll take refrigerator mother. I'll just take this was all your fault and there's nothing to be done about it now.
Well,
Like,
too
I
late
think I would
now.
rather that paradigm in some way than the
Right.
paradigm of like you and this is how things change for kids. And the last thing, and please hear me, I am not criticizing the like super moms who go out and like get this stuff done. This is who changes the world. This is
Mhm.
like,
Right.
Lorenzo's oil, the mom, there's old talk
Mhm.
about an old timey alert, a old deluxe alert. But I mean, it's the movie about the woman she's got this like kid with special needs and she can't figure out the medical mystery and she like finds the oil that cures him. Like,
Susan
okay,
Sarandon as, like, a sweet protagonist, completely
yeah, she
uncomplicated
won the
figure.
Oscar, I'm sure, whatever.
Right,
But,
everybody
like,
loved it.
I don't want to find the special oil. I just wanna take a nap and read my book and watch some
Mhm.
Netflix. And I
Because you
think
won't win
that
anyway. Because 'cause you're not gonna nobody's ever gonna be like, "You, come to the front of the line. You, mom, have done everything right."
well, yeah, I mean,
That's not gonna
Susan
happen.
Sarandon might play me in a movie, though, Amy, that'd be good. I'll take that. But no, I mean, I do think that this is and I do not think, to be fair, that this comes all from expectations. Like, I think this comes a little bit from, our own identity or whatever drives us to have that, like, I am the person who can solve everybody's problems, and that's a big part of my identity, and, like, I don't run towards every problem because society and the patriarchy tell me so, question mark. Like, I don't
Mhm.
exactly know where this stems from, but I think thinking of it in a context of mom blame is, like, so baked in the cake is very useful and helpful, and I have another Paula Kaplan for you. Can I hit you
Okay,
with it?
alright.
So Paula Kaplan wrote a book. Her definitive text was called unfortunately, I was like, "We need to have Paula Kaplan on the show." She passed away, and I'm very sad to hear it because when I read this stuff, I was like, "I wanna talk to this person so badly."
Mm,
She wrote a book called The New Don't Blame Mother. This is again in the '80s, but I'm referencing an article from Medium by a woman whose name I'm sure I will not get right, but it is Rosake Hasseldine, as I understand its pronunciation. And it's called How Mother Blaming Hurts the Mother Daughter Bond. So she's referencing daughters, but I found this like very useful as a concept in terms of our own relationships with our kids and how this informs it. And I think, Amy, this is really going to land with you.
okay, alright.
She describes mother daughter blaming as moderate air pollution that we learn to tolerate and ignore until we wake up to how harmful it is to our health. Mother blaming is in the air we breathe within this patriarchal society, which blames mothers for everything and anything. And this woman, the author, is a therapist. And she talks a lot about let me give you this example so I don't try to explain it and get it wrong.
Okay.
A daughter in her 20s came to see me because she wanted help with her mother's behavior, which her previous therapist had diagnosed as controlling. She told me that her previous therapist had diagnosed her mother as enmeshed and controlling and wanted help setting clearer boundaries with her mother. As she talked about how her mother is both loving and caring and needy and controlling, I asked her to describe who her mother was as a person and a woman. She looked surprised by my question. She said that no one had ever asked her who her mother was as a person. And after a minute or two of silence, she said, I don't know. She has always just been mom. She is mom in the family. Even my dad treats her as mom. And this just I get chills just reading it out loud.
Mhm.
This idea that, like, mothers are just this kind of huge archetype in our lives to be handled, basically.
Right.
That, like, mom, she's so controlling. We just have to talk to our therapist about how to control her and how to put boundaries around her because she is just the controlling mom.
Or just
And
that she's just gonna be that way. Yes, I can think of a perfect example of this. Yes.
hit me,
Well,
because this really got me, and I was like, I feel like we've had conversations around this, but this idea of, like, even our therapists are like, "Well, your mom, your mom, she was this and that." Like, your mom was the result of a ton of things that, like, we're not even bothering to try to understand. We're just being like, "Oh, you're poor controlling mom. Let's put boundaries around her."
Right, exactly. I'm thinking of, like, a recent example. We were dropping off my, kid at college, and, my husband was on the phone with somebody that he works with, and they were, just chit-chat. He was making small talk with this person, and I'm only listening to the one part of the conversation, right? I'm only getting the, like, walking down the sidewalk, listening to what my spouse is saying, and it was like, "Yeah, we're dropping him off today." "Yeah." Oh, yeah, well, you know how moms are. She's definitely gonna be upset. Like, the person on the phone said something to my husband, like, "And here, cue the waterworks with the
Oh
mother," and
god.
my husband just playing along
Sure.
with somebody, like, being like, "Yep, oh, yeah, she's gonna be a mess, that's for sure," and I was like, "Are you like, the phone," and I said, "I like, stop that. Stop, like, gendering me with, like, I'm gonna be the crying mess, because no, I'm not, and, like, don't participate in that, like, you know how moms are," and it was a completely harmless example, but this sort of helps me understand. I think my husband was like, "Okay, sorry," like, sort of like, "Ooh," but didn't I don't think he really got why it bothered me so much, and I think it was 2 men on the phone saying, like, "This is how moms behave, so this is certainly how that little lady's gonna behave," as if we're all the same, as if even if I were emotional, that would be something to be just, like, eye rolled at and withstood by the much more, rational spouse who doesn't have to feel anything emotional, you know what I mean? It just was there's a
Right.
lot implicit in that. I'm like, "I'm not playing that, like, that's not stop projecting that on me, that's not who I am, and you know that."
Well, I think you're jumping to solutions, Amy, in part 2, but I
Oh.
think it is really important to give voice to this stuff. And I think that we've talked about it in a lot of other contexts, but this has really crystallized for me the idea. And now that I have teens and tweens, and I feel like when we started the podcast, I had little kids who were like, their problem was like they were annoying and yat loud and needy. And then you would sometimes talk about your, like, tweens as, it's hard when they're kind of, like, rejecting of you. I'm like, "Oh god, a kid who rejected me sounds like the best thing to ever
Sounds like
happen
5
to me.
minutes
These
off,
kids are,
right.
like, hanging on, like, I can't wait for the day these
Right.
kids are rejecting me." But I think that the work of humanizing ourselves for our own children, and then, like, I have other thoughts about how to do this in a larger way in society, is
Mhm,
super important. And I find
mhm.
myself saying to my kids sometimes, that really hurts my feelings. That, I also had a tough day, and that the way you're talking to me really hurts my feelings. And really giving voice to, like, saying in front of your kids, like, that seems really dismissive. I mean, I'm not to pick on your husband. Like, I totally understand the dynamic of, like, we're in
Mhm,
a joke. And I
mhm.
think the conversations around this get very complicated because you don't want it to become like your husband's having a fairly harmless conversation with someone and you're suddenly like, I will never tolerate this and I'm going
These
to call
gendered
you out and
perceptions, right?
these gendered person, the patriarchy talking. It's like, whoa,
Right,
dude, I was
right.
just trying to, like,
Just
get
joking
off
with
the
somebody
phone
I
with a
don't know.
colleague,
Right, right,
like,
right.
obviously you don't want the conversation to come down to, like, one line that you said is now demonstrative of everything. But I do think that giving voice to and really pushing back against this idea of, like, I'm not a person, I'm just your mom. It it's very, very important in a way that I think is both micro and macro. Like, saying to your children, what you said just hurt my feelings. Sometimes it's my turn to get what I want and not your turn to get what you want. And, I'm afraid of that thing. And it is really hard for me to show up as myself in certain situations because of the way that I was treated in other situations. And I think those conversations, we feel like either there's not room for them or we feel like, I don't know, maybe even it's a little tweet to be like, "My needs." It's like, what do you think about that?
I think that I'm thinking back, like, but why do we do this? Like, why is there this need to sort of blame the mother and keep her at bay? And, like, the problem is the mother. If she just was like, stop being around all the time, there wouldn't be these problems until she's not around. And then the problem was she wasn't around. It doesn't make any sense. But I think it's like we each have in us, male, female, everybody. We each have this need in us to need our mother, and then as we get older to reject our mother to be able to live independently. And I do think there's a completely understandable um psychological thing in us, like, yeah, who needs her anyway? Like, she's just getting in my way. Like, I think that you have to have a little bit of that thinking in order to leave the nest.
For
And so,
sure, to
and then we
separate.
all have that, right? And so it's a bunch of, male scientists 100 years ago, 50 years ago being like, who the real problem is? Moms. Am I right, guys? Like, when they were, it was like one big phone call, like of dudes being like, who'll be crying? Mom. Because that's how she is. Like, that was what, they didn't have to talk to women. They didn't have to make decisions with women. But I
Right.
also do think that, like, I was talking to a professional about this, about my kids coming home from college and how your relationship with them changes. You go through that thing of them leaving the nest, which is hard. And then they've left and they come back. And there's this, sort of readjustment that has to happen when they're back under your roof, when you're telling them to load the dishwasher, like things that they're not used to, that it's back, that there can be irritants. And, this person just said to me, like, just expect that to occur. Expect there to be a regression where they need your help with something, and then they're mad at you that they need your help with something, and isn't mom annoying? Like, that's just going to happen. And because it does. And it doesn't make it like okay. And it doesn't mean that you have to accept it as true and something to fixing yourself. You just sort of say like, oh, there it is. There it is. It's the push pull of I'm independent. No, I'm not. And I'm mad at you that I'm not independent. So I think just sort of knowing that it's going to happen because that's how human nature is, but it doesn't make it true that moms are the root of everything that went wrong in somebody's life. I don't know, sort of holding that awareness is helpful.
I also think voicing it is important, and I think that you're right. There's an old Simpsons joke where Homer says, "Beer, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems." And I'm
Yeah.
like, also moms, as it turns out.
Right. Right.
But I think that there is a role in this that is bigger than just like, because I really, when prepping for this episode, thought our conversation was going to be like, now that we understand it, we can take better care of ourselves. And in my new radicalized self, Amy, I'm like, no, no.
Mhm.
Now that we understand it, we must fight it with all we have. And
Mhm.
so let's take a break because after this, I want to talk a little bit about some radical solutions.
Love it.
Okay. So I want to talk about this in terms of a metaphor. Do you listen to Maintenance Phase, the podcast,
I
Amy?
do. I do. I
Okay,
get it
so a
now
lot
and
of
again.
people listen to Maintenance Phase. If you don't, it's about diet culture, body shaming. We talked to Virginia Soul Smith about kind of existing in a larger body and how we start to change the dialogue around that. And I feel like this is something I have watched change in real time in the last 5 years. And one of the things it's a lot about just how we treat weight, what role it plays. And I went to the doctor 2
Yeah.
days ago and they were like, "Are you comfortable being weighed or not?" And I thought, this is real time. I am watching the dialogue around this change. That is something that no one would have ever asked me 5 years ago. And now there's a big dialogue about whether or not weight should play a role in the doctor when you're going to get checked for an earache or different things. That like
Mhm.
your weight has nothing to do with why you have an earache or
Mhm.
not, and that marrying those two things is harmful to all people.
And that happened because people were willing to have some difficult and uncomfortable conversations. It occurs to me to say, like, hey, you know what? Somebody probably said to that nurse practitioner or whoever it was along the way, like, you know what? That's not, I'd rather you not weigh me or don't tell me what I weigh. Or like somebody brought it up.
I
Somebody
think people
started that
brought it up to
conversation.
her, and I also think there has been a larger cultural conversation around how we treat weight in this
Mm-hmm.
country
Mm-hmm.
and how it's not working the way we've been doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna stop doing it. And that people who like, I definitely remember the dialogue 10 years ago that was like, "Oh my god, fat acceptance. These losers. Like, how dare they ask for anything when being fat is completely their fault?" And like that dialogue has changed for the better in the past 15 years
Yes.
because of activism around it and because of people being willing to have one-on-one conversations and people being able to have wide conversations, people writing about it, talking about it in public spaces. We are changing the conversation about weight culturally
Yeah.
in small ways. I'm not like, yay,
Mhm.
and we're done. And scene. Great job. And that example really came to me when I was thinking about this. And I think that like this is how we need to start changing the conversation about mothers and how we blame them for things. And let me read you this quote from
Okay.
this Medium article. The counseling and marriage family professions have a responsibility to fight against mother blaming by exposing how mother blaming is designed to harm a mother's ability to know herself and the emotional attunement between mothers, and she says, and daughters. I'm going to say, and children.
Right, even that I was thinking that the mother-daughter thing that she's so
Right.
interested in is kind of another example of the
It's
same
even
thing.
broader than that. It has a
Right.
duty to expose the implicit bias we all internalize about motherhood, and it has a duty to examine the theories that are being taught as fact for hidden sexist beliefs and harmful gender role stereotyping.
Mhm.
Like the whole dialogue around motherhood, I think it's changing. Like, I think that the refrigerator mother is like, okay, that's crazy. But I think as the dialogue continues to evolve, the like, what did your mother do to cause your problems? Starting point of all like conversations, especially therapeutic conversations, is worth examining.
Yeah. I mean, it comes from a time when the dad was pretty uninvolved day to day with the raising of you, like, showed up at dinner time, if that, right? Provided for the family, the mom was making all the decisions. I think that's changing, so that those pretty soon there'll be blame to go around, like, "Your my parents messed me up, my dad did this because it isn't the mom doing all the child raising anymore.
And I don't think it's just mothers and fathers. I think it is, this is another quote from the same article. It is common in my experience for therapists to admit to see mothers as people. In our patriarchal society, motherhood is all defining of mother's life and identity. And that this becomes normalized in counseling and human development theories. And that is sort of the source of the problem, that like the
Mm,
monolithic mother, right? That like the mom can't stop crying at college drop off. And like, oh my God, we have to set boundaries around your mother who wants to see
mhm,
the kids
mhm,
again. Like that
mhm,
mother as like a concept that is infused with eye rolling negativity needs to
mhm,
change.
mhm. That's
That
right.
lights me up, man. That
I,
lights me up.
I totally I totally agree, and I think it's exciting to live in a time when that's a possibility, but that just going back to that whole, like, and the mother-daughter dynamic and, like, the daughters need to stop being mad at the moms and, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, this person in the '80s was so right about that, but still had this sort of blind spot that, like,
Well,
the
this
mother-daughter
person,
relationship, it
though,
needs to be fixed, and the
this is the
mother-son
Medium
relationship is not a
article, so
thing.
this isn't the same person, Amy.
Okay, alright. Um, but that, I just think about how the whole, um outdated stereotypical idea that I think still exists that when a son gets married, it's, goodbye because
Right.
now the daughter-in-law is going to take over, right? Like now the young mom is gonna be and her annoying all
Your space
need
has been taken by the new young
yes,
mom, and she's gonna set
yes,
boundaries. Yeah.
but your daughter will be a daughter for the rest of your life, and so, I do think there are a lot of us um whose parents have different expectations of their adult daughters and their adult sons, and then we
Mhm.
take them on, right? That really I have to be the one to drive dad to his physical therapy appointment because I'm the daughter, and so I'm supposed to do more of that sort of work because I'm better at it or something. It's just it's something that we continue to accept and assume.
And I think it's fundamental, and I have a lot of faith in the next generation because I see it with, like, the young women we work with and just young women, my nieces. I feel like they approach things really, really differently, and they're not kind of putting up with some of the nonsense that we put up with. But I really came into this, as I've said repeatedly, but I'm so stuck on it. Like, oh, well, once we understand this, we can synthesize it and accept it, and we can take care of ourselves in relation to this thing. And in thinking about it under these contexts and reading this writing, I was like, oh no, this needs to change. I need to demand respect for myself. I need to
Mm,
say to my children, like, it is actually not okay for you to like dump your garbage all over me when you're in a bad mood. I'm an actual human person. And it doesn't feel good to me when you do that. And by the way, when you, goofy colleague of husbands, are goofing on me because I'm upset that my children, who I was told by society I was supposed to invest 18 years in, are now leaving. Like, I don't accept that. I reject it in the same way that I reject being weighed at the doctor's office when I have an earache. And I
Mhm.
feel that there is a lot of like work to be done in our own lives. And I have had conversations with people I've dated and people in my life about like, this is a tough topic because I had a very good mom. She was an excellent, good at the job, a genuinely good person, and did great at the
Well,
role.
she was also a therapist, so I
She
think
was
she
a
was also a,
therapist.
what's the she was not self-actualized, but self-examined, you know, like she
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky. I had a really, really good mother. I got lucky. But even when I talk to people who are like, my mother was useless, there is a little part of me that's like, you are alive though. I mean, she did feed you every day. Like, after becoming a mom, I'm like, you know how you get 200 on the SATs just for filling out your name? Like, I'm like, she gets a 200 from me
Right.
though. Like, she didn't do nothing. I'm
Mhm.
sure she did not do a good job. And I'm sure she hurt you in many ways. But I think there is a lot of room. I don't know how this plays out. I think the problem is like you don't ever want to play this out individually because people
Right.
have their own difficult individual experiences
Right.
that you cannot comment on and you cannot understand. But I do think writ large, I am really interested in like the next generation of a movement that says, we're not doing it. We're not doing the thing where it's all mom's fault.
I hope that, you know, some of the people listening who have like a 2-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, because so many of our listeners are at an earlier place in their parenting journey than us. I feel like this might be really helpful and useful to sort of, I don't know, jump the line a little bit and be like, yeah, this is coming, and don't stand for it when you know, everybody rolls their eyes at you as having always been, you know, way extra for stupid reasons in 10 years. Like, no, you weren't. You're doing a great job now. You're going to be doing a great job then.
Absolutely. And I do think that we try on the podcast to push back against any suggestion that like, oh, the problem is mom is so uptight or
Mhm.
mom is too
Right.
relaxed or mom
Mom's too
isn't doing
anxious,
it
or mom,
right.
right, right.
Yeah. But I do think after like this researching this episode, it's really caused me to rethink like a lot about just giving voice to a mom is a person. It doesn't seem that radical, but it's one of those like simple but extremely radical ideas that like your own mother and all mothers are people living in an unsupportive structure that kind of pegs them into difficult roles. And then their own development has caused them to have their own problems functioning within that system. And that's different than like, I roll mom, which,
Mhm.
you know, I think it's just useful to reflect on. And then Amy, let the revolution come.
Okay.
I'm ready.
We have raised some consciousness today of us, of
Of
ourselves.
myself. I'm like
Yeah.
completely when my husband comes home, I'm gonna be like, "Have a seat. We need to talk."
Listen to me.
Friends, having solved the role of mothers throughout time, we would now like to ask you a favor. We would like you to make sure that you are following this podcast wherever you listen,
Mhm.
and do tell a friend about the podcast. We are continuing to trying to grow these many years into the podcast. And what helps that is people who are following on every platform. Wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you're following.
It's true that word of mouth is the number one way that people find new podcasts to listen to. It's certainly how I do it. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can probably certainly within Apple Podcasts, within Spotify, within Good Pods, within many, many podcast apps, you can tap on the little square with an arrow coming out of it and share it right from the app to a friend who you think might enjoy it.
Or to social media and just say, hey, friends, looking
Everyone.
for a podcast? Check out Amy and Margaret.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
To
what
the
we want you to
world.
do.
To the
Share
world.
it to the world. Share it to the world. And with that, thanks so much for listening. And we'll talk to you next time.
So long.